So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Chariot card, and we'll be looking at different decks, looking at the astrology, looking at different symbols, and really trying to tap into the meaning of this so that we can apply it to our readings and apply it to our lives, right? What message is this card trying to tell us? And I think it's really interesting because when we look at the RWS card and we look at the Toph card, one of the things that really stands out is that there are no controls, no physical controls, at least, to the Chariot. There are no reins. There is no way to move this thing around. And I think that we get a little bit wrapped up in our physical perspective of how to control the Chariot. And really, it's something different. And I think that we get bombarded with these ideas of hustle culture and daily grind and just these extreme ways of living that I think are, I don't know, they're just ways that kind of lead to burnout and frustration. And they don't really pan out in the end to something that we can use to improve the quality of our lives. It's just too much. And I think that if we tap into some other things in our lives, it might be more useful. This card from the Tarot of Echoes is really interesting because it really shows that determination. It shows that strength. And that's what you usually find when you look up the Chariot card. You look up the card and you find information about how to maintain focus and drive and do all these things to make something happen and to move forward that way. But there's more to it than that. I'm not saying that there isn't a place for this. There's not a place for just, putting forth that effort. There really is. But there's a balance that needs to be reached. And the Chariot card really does ask us to balance out our polarities. You see the two Sphinx in the front, and they're different colors because they are in opposition to each other. And we need to bring them back into focus in order to balance things out and make the Chariot move. But again, there's no physical way to do that. And I love this card from the Everyday Enchantment Tarot. And the reason why I like it is because it really shows that contrast between, I guess, that grind of life and more of going with the flow of nature. And you have these people in the background and they seem to be a part of a system. They're in these suits and they're maybe headed to work or headed to some sort of routine. And you have someone that's just kind of going with the flow. I think both cases can be extreme, but again, there's a balance between these things. We can pull some from our effort and our physical effort because we live in a physical world, but there's also that spiritual side that I think is important. And I'll tell you what I mean by that, because I don't want you to think that I'm talking about spiritual in a certain sense. There's what I mean by spiritual is something different from, I think, the norm or what we've been programmed to think that spirituality really is. One of the things we need in order to make the Chariot go forward is we need to understand something. But what is that? What do we need to know? And this card from the Tarot of the Holy Spectrum kind of indicates that you need to know something, because the person sitting in the car and they're probably wondering, well, why am I not making progress? Why is nothing changing in my life? Why am I not moving towards my goals? Why are my desires not coming to fruition? And it's because they don't know there's no wheels on the car and they're just sitting there. So you can have all the talent in the world. You can have all the determination in the world. But if you don't know who you are and you don't know who your true will is, or you don't know what your true will is, then that progress, you may make no progress, or that progress may not be the best thing for you and for other people. So this person is looking out. They're looking out into the universe. And there's this silhouetted figure out there that's beckoning them to come forward. And so the question is, who are you? What are you? And you have to figure that out. That's part of gathering the reins for the Chariot. That's part of getting the key to that vehicle. That's part of putting the wheels on that vehicle, is to understand something. There's something that you need to know. In fact, in Greek mythology, the Sphinxes, but in order to get past them and to go forward, they would ask you a question. And it was like this riddle that they would give you. And the riddle was, it's something like, what It's on all four legs in the morning, is on two legs in midday, and on three legs in the evening. And the answer to the question was man, because at birth they're crawling, and then during their life they are walking on two legs, and then at old age sometimes they use a cane. And so that was the answer to it. But the riddle wasn't to see if you could figure out the riddle. The riddle was just to imply that there's some things you need to understand before you can move forward in your life. And one of those things is who you are. Who really are you? What are you? And I know I asked that already, but that's it. And until you know that, you're missing a sort of power source. And I'm going to read a quote from Aleister Crowley about that, because I think that he was right. So the quote goes, "A man or person who is doing his true will has the inertia of the universe to assist him or her." And what that means is that there's a sort of power to this card that you need to apply, but you can't get it until you know your true will. And so I love this card from the Hermetic Tarot because the title of it, first of all, says the Lord of the Triumph of Light. And we'll find out more why it says that as we move on. But yeah, once you tap into your inner world, there is a light there, and you'll be able to apply that light to the physical world. And that's the victory that we're talking about. That's when light wins. Because if you don't focus on it and you're focused on the external world with your determination and grind, and you don't look within and find that light, it is subdued and silhouetted like the person on the holy spectrum. So I love this card from the Pistis Sophia Tarot because it has the goddess Nike on there. And it just kind of shows a contrast between on the Tarot of Echoes. The Tarot of Echoes, you get this person that is really using this determination, but the person on the Pistis Sophia Tarot has tapped into the triumph of light. We can all do that. And the question is, well, how do I do that? Like, Will, you're talking about this divine spark. You're talking about this light. Well, what is it? How do I connect to it? And what's the point, right? So first of all, there's different ways that people end up tapping into it. And one way is it's just a matter of time as you go through all these things and you get burnt out and you end up turning to that inner world. So if we look at this card from the Navigators of the Mystic Sea Tarot, we can see that there's this person in blue that's tied to this rope, and the rope's stuck in the ground with this stake, and they can't move anywhere. They have this huge sword and they could cut that rope, but they just don't have the energy. They're burnt out, right? So they're handing this sword over. They're trying to hand it over to the person in the chariot. The person in the chariot is not even taking it. The person in the chariot is doing a lot better. But that person reached a point where they turned to that inner light because they got to the end of the line or the end of the rope, right? So that's one way. But there is another way too. And another way is that, we hear all these things about increase your vibration. We hear these things about increase your frequency. And I think that people mean well when they say that, but there's certain circumstances when that applies. And the person on the chariot in the Navigators of the Mystic Sea has something with them in that chariot. So if you look in front of them on kind of the front part of the chariot, you can see there's this shadowy figure. Well, what is that? So that's your shadow. That's the things that you may be trying to suppress in order to maybe raise this vibration. You should be raising your shadow, right? So you should go in and be transparent. So when you go into your inner world and you tap into your divine spark, what people try to do is they try to think that, okay, well, I won't tap into this unless I'm high vibrational, unless I'm high frequency. Well, no, because your divine spark knows you and it wants you. It doesn't want some person with a mask on, pretending like they're happy, pretending like they're at a high vibrational state. How do you really feel? How do you feel about the situations in your life? How do you feel about your problems? How do you feel about the world right now? How do you feel about being in the world right now? Be honest with it, because it knows you and you can't fool who you really are. I want to read this quote from William Shakespeare. And it says, "All the world's a stage. All the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. And one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages." So what that means is that we play these characters, we play these roles in the physical world, but that's not you. So when you go into your inner world, you'll see who you are. But in order to do that, you have to bring a true representation of what you feel. And that's really important. That's the key to tapping into that. And I think that's where people think that they feel this guilt about expressing their hurt, expressing their pain, expressing the things that they've been through. They feel this guilt about that. And you don't have to when you go into your inner world, because your inner world knows you and it loves you. That divine spark is you and it knows you. When you find out what that is, you'll change. There'll be a transformation. You'll be like the person on the chariot in the Navigators of the Mystic Sea Tarot. And the reason why is because if we look back at the top deck, that charioteer, they're sitting in this meditation pose, they're going inward, and they are completely covered in armor. Now, one of the reasons why they're completely covered in this armor is because, from what I've read, no one can look at the charioteer and live. And that doesn't mean that you're going to physically die. It just means that the character, the role you were playing, will die. That version will die, because you'll find out what your true will and your true destiny is and who you really, really are. So that's why I asked you at the beginning of this, who are you? What are you? And so that's really important, right? And we'll talk about why that's important, because you're a part of something bigger. If we look at this card from the Surrealist Tarot, it has all of these things packed into this really abstract picture. So there's this painting of someone over like a fireplace moving on a cart. It's just totally weird, but they're moving on this cart and they're moving forward, right? And there's this dove in front of its face. A dove represents spirituality. So they see through their spiritual eyes. They see their true will, their true destination, first of all. The picture frame of the person is just a character. It's not what they really are. It's like William Shakespeare said. But they're part of something bigger, because what this really is a wall that's been torn off of a house and it's been put onto this chariot. But this wall is not the whole picture. It's doing something. A wall of a house isn't meant to be on a cart rolling down some railroad tracks. It should be on a house having a totally different purpose. So you may be operating in the physical world as a physical character, doing things that are not tapped into what your purpose is. But you'll find that we're all coming out of this sort of programming right now. So this card is Cancer. This card is associated with the sign of Cancer. The sun is exalted, or the sun is actually at its solstice or its highest point in the month of Cancer on our calendar. So that's at its solstice, right? And that is magnifying light. That is that triumph of light that we're talking about. We can see on the RWS card, there is this circle, this solar disk, and it has these wings on it, right? So it's that high point of light. So it also has an association with the moon, because the moon is exalted or at home. The moon is at home or domicile in Cancer. And what that means is that this card is also connected to the High Priestess. The High Priestess card has some similarities here. The High Priestess card has those pillars that are opposite colors, so it's about balancing polarities as well, but it's more focused on that inner world. This card is focused on the inner world because you can see that on the top deck, he's in the meditative pose. And you can also see that on the RWS deck, there are those 2 different color sphinxes in the front. So it has that sort of energy to it, but it also has a sense of power, of transformation, or transforming that spiritual energy. And we'll talk about that right now. And I think that this next card that I show you really brings everything into perspective. So this is from the Blue Apple Tarot. And the person, there's like a child riding on top of a huge pituitary gland. And you're like, well, why a pituitary gland? And the reason why is because the pituitary gland is, among other things, very much about regulating the hormones that control our metabolism. So the way that we use our energy, we eat our food and we metabolize that through cellular respiration, and that system, that cycle of bringing in food, metabolizing it, and using it for energy. And so when we think about this metabolism, it's kind of an analogy to that spiritual metabolism that needs to take place as well. We take in the spiritual energy, we metabolize that, and we use it in the physical world. And I find that that's a beautiful imagery. And you can see that there's this winged being up here at the top. And that winged being has an ankh. Ankhs are about the cycles of energy, right? So once we have that energy and we're using it, we don't just allow it to be vampirically sucked off of us, but we use the idea or the concept of the ankh to cycle that energy in our bodies, and to also use it to move ourselves around in the physical world in a way that does not burn us out. So we move and we power this world in a different way by doing that. This card is also connected to the Wheel of Fortune. So you can see that it goes from that blue canopy, which represents Bina, down those red pillars, and you have that red energy coming from the center of the person, and you have these red wheels. That's the power of Mars powering the Wheel of Fortune. The Wheel of Fortune is also connected to this card. In the Wheel of Change Tarot, you can see that connection from the abdomen area going out to all these wheels that are around it. And those wheels power cycles. Actually, the chariot, the power of the chariot powers these cycles, the cycles of the moon, the rotation of the earth, the rotation of the planets. All these things have to happen in order to provide the perspective of space and time. Time is about cycles, but those cycles exist because of rotation and because of the actual wheel. And we also see the wheel on the alchemical tarot, and we see how it's powered by these different glyphs here. One of them is sulfur, which is connected to the emperor, which is connected to Mars. And a lot of cards will illustrate that connection with Mars. So on the Pagan Otherworlds tarot, we have these rams on Thor's chariot. Okay. Ram is the symbol for Aries, which is connected to Mars. And then also on the John Bauer tarot, we also have another ram pulling the chariot. And so I'm not sure if the artist understood that connection with Mars, but it's interesting that they put rams there or goats there in order to show that that connection. So let's move on here and let's talk about the element from the periodic table that I like to associate with my cards, right? I like to do that. If you haven't watched my videos before, I like to look at elements from the periodic table. I go through them in order, and I talk about them in relation to the energy of the tarot card that I'm on. And the one that I'm talking about today is nitrogen, element number 7 on the periodic table. So let's talk about nitrogen and how it connects to this card. So first of all, nitrogen is what we call a diatomic element, meaning that it's stable when it exists as two elements joined together. And nitrogen has this strong triple bond that bonds two nitrogens together in order to be stable. And it'll exist in the world in a way that's not reactive because of that, because it's already kind of satisfying certain rules, namely the octet rule, because it exists in this dual nature. And so it avoids that reactivity of being out in the world and being hit with a lot of things. Just like with the chariot, right? We have to balance the polarity of the sphinxes in order to make the chariot move forward and not be very chaotic and reactive. And so nitrogen is also odorless, colorless, and tasteless. And it has this etheric feel to it where we have to use different things from our senses, our physical senses, in order to really detect it. And it functions in a way that supports life and it's there for life, but at the same time, it's separate. The word nitrogen has another word in French that's still used called azote. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'll put the name of it up here so you can take a look at it, but it means beyond life. So it has this spiritual, etheric meaning to it. But at the same time, nitrogen is a part of our DNA, a major component of our DNA. So it has that connection between the spirit and the physical world. And it brings a lot of energy to that life in the physical world. Nitrogen is very much an energy source. TNT, trinitrotoluene, is an explosive. You also have dynamite, which is an explosive that's also has nitrogen in it. Nitroglycerin, that's also has nitrogen in it. So you can see the power of that, right? And so when we talk about bringing forth the power of the universe, that's what we're talking about. But the thing about it is, with this power, without your true will, there's destructive things that we can do when we get on the chariot and we move forward without knowing that. And I think that this story, this last story that I'm going to tell you about, kind of sums all of that up. And there's this guy named Fritz Haber, and he was making fertilizer. Fertilizer is really important because nitrogen, even though it's very etheric and very out there, it can be fixed into the soil to support life. Just like spirit is etheric and it's out there, can be fixed in the soil and support, or fixed in the physical body, physical bodies, and support life. But he was making nitrogen, and maybe this was a part of his true will and his true destination, because that fertilizer supports our planet. It supports our population. Without having that fertilizer, we can't make as many crops as we make today to support so many people. So maybe that was something that he tapped into that was going on the right path. But why was he doing that? Did he know who he was? Did he know what he was? Did he know his true will? Because later on, he started working on chemicals for chemical warfare and deploying them on the battlefield in World War II and destroying the lives of soldiers before and after the war. After the war, he was labeled a war criminal and imprisoned. And then later, he was rejected and sent away by the Nazis who he was working with because he was Jewish, or he had a Jewish background. Now, the thing about this is, he was working on something else. He was working on a pesticide, which, seems like it's a good thing for crops, right? To kind of help sustain crops so they don't get eaten, so that we have more people, so that more people have food, right? But because of the path that he took, the Nazis were able to take that pesticide, which was called Zyklon A, and modify it into a version called Zyklon B. Zyklon B was used to kill Jews during the Holocaust in the concentration camps. So why did I tell this story? We can do all kinds of things with our talents and our skills, but in the end, we won't get anywhere. It's worthless and pointless without knowing who we are, what our divine will is, because that is what's going to be best for us and best for everyone around us. So those are some things to consider. I think that it's really important to talk about one last thing here, and I'm going to read something from the Tarot of the Spirit. And so for the Tarot of Spirit, this card is the signature card from that deck. So some decks have a card that the author either resonates with because of maybe it's their birth card, or it's just a card that kind of they feel represents them. And so they will sign that card. And so the author of this deck signed the Chariot card. And what they wrote here, I think, is very fitting. So I'm going to leave you with this information, and then I'll end this. But it says, may consciousness be the vehicle that carries me to my true nature. My true nature is anima cosma. My true nature is love. May I be guided by love. May I be nurtured on my path. May love flow into me. May it permeate my being. May love flow out of me, permeating the world. May I remove all obstacles to the full expression of love. The path of the soul is love. Love is the soul's expression. Life is my vehicle. Consciousness is my vehicle. May I enter cosmic alignment. May I pursue the path of wisdom. May I pursue the path of love. May I open to receive the key of the Chariot. I think that's just awesome, right? So I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know I've been gone for a little while, but I'm back, and I have a lot more to share. So thank you guys for watching so much. And my name is Will. This is Atypical Tarot. I'll see you next time.